Water covered 98% of Thalassia Prime. The planet gleamed blue and silver from orbit, its surface interrupted only by scattered floating platforms where off-worlders conducted their business. Below those platforms, in cities built from coral and crystallized minerals, the Kelthari people thrived in their natural element. They were an ancient species, older than most civilizations in the Galactic Council, and they carried themselves with the quiet dignity that came from 10,000 years of unbroken history. The Imperial Palace rested in the deepest part of the planet's largest ocean. Its walls curved and spiraled like a nautilus shell, glowing with bioluminescent patterns that shifted with the currents. Empress Velen swam through the corridor toward the nursery for the 100th time that day. Her fins, normally graceful and flowing, moved with jerky desperation. She could hear the crying before she reached the chamber. Princess Lissa had been crying for 3 full planetary rotations. The sound cut through water and walls alike, a high-pitched wail that made every Kelthari within hearing distance feel physical pain. It was not supposed to be this way. Kelthari infants were meant to bond within hours of birth, through specific sound frequencies produced by their family groups. The bonding created neural pathways necessary for healthy development. Without it, an infant would suffer permanent damage or die within days. Inside the nursery, 5 physicians surrounded the small basin where Lissa floated. The infant was barely the length of an adult's forearm, her scales a pale blue that should have been vibrant. Her tiny fins fluttered weakly. Emperor Dran stood against the far wall, his powerful frame rigid with helplessness. He was a ruler who commanded fleets and negotiated treaties with dozens of species, but he could not help his own daughter. "We have tried every traditional frequency," said Dr. Benth, the chief physician. His voice carried the weight of failure. "The synthesizers, the recordings, even the ancestral harmonics from the deep temples. Nothing works." "Then try something non-traditional," Velen said. Her voice cracked. She had not left the nursery since Lisa's cries began. "Contact every species in the council. Someone must have knowledge we lack." Dran moved to his mate's side. "We will find an answer. I swear it." The call went out across the sector within the hour. An Imperial infant in distress. All knowledge welcome. The response was overwhelming. Scientists, doctors, and specialists from 40 different species requested permission to try their methods. The Kelthari, despite their pride, accepted every offer. 2 floors above the palace, in the section reserved for Galactic Council diplomats and their support staff, David Walsh pushed his cleaning cart down a quiet hallway. He was a tall man with graying hair and permanent smile lines around his eyes. Though he was not smiling now, he was focused on his work. The floors in this section were made from polished stone that required specific cleaning solutions to avoid damage. David had been doing this job for 6 years. He knew every corner, every surface, every trick to make the work go faster. He pulled out his small music player and fitted the earbuds into his ears. The embassy wing was always empty this time of night. Nobody minded if he listened to music while he worked. David scrolled through his collection and selected an old playlist labeled Grandma's Songs. The first track started and David began humming along. His voice was deep but gentle, carrying melodies his grandmother had taught him 60 years ago on Earth's coast. David worked methodically, moving from room to room. He mopped floors, cleaned windows, emptied waste receptacles. His hands moved on autopilot while his mind wandered. He thought about his daughter back on Earth, about the message she had sent last week asking when he would visit. He thought about retirement still 7 years away. He thought about the strange tension he had noticed among the diplomatic staff lately. Everyone seemed worried, whispering in corners, but nobody had explained why. In the palace nursery, an avian specialist from the coral species finished her attempt. She had sung in frequencies that made grown Kelthari weep with beauty. Lisa only cried harder. Next came a DREM engineer who used vibration technology to create harmonic waves through the water itself. Lissa's cries grew weaker, which the doctor said was worse than loud wailing. It meant she was giving up. A delegation from the Harmonic Collective arrived next. They were beings of pure energy who communicated through elaborate sound patterns. They surrounded Lisa's basin and filled the room with their song. It was mathematical perfection, frequencies layered with precision that no organic species could match. Lissa made no response at all. The collective apologized and departed, baffled. Velen felt hope dying in her chest. She reached into the basin and let Lissa wrap tiny fingers around her own. The infant's grip was growing weaker. "Please," Velen whispered to no one in particular. "Please, someone help her." Emperor Dran stood beside his mate, his face carved from stone. Inside, he was screaming. He had fought wars. He had survived assassination attempts. He had negotiated peace between species that hated each other. But this was a battle he could not fight. His daughter was slipping away and he was powerless. Dr. Benth checked his instruments again. Lisa's neural development had stalled completely. They had perhaps 2 more days before the damage became irreversible. After that, even if they found a solution, Lisa would never be fully healthy. The doctor did not say this aloud. Everyone in the room already knew. In the embassy wing, David finished cleaning the last office. He checked his timepiece and nodded with satisfaction. He was ahead of schedule tonight. He pushed his cart toward the storage closet, still humming, completely unaware that 3 floors below, an infant princess was dying. He did not know that 47 specialists had failed. He did not know that an empire was holding its breath in desperation. David Walsh only knew that he had floors to clean and old songs to hum, and that tomorrow he would do the same thing all over again. It was a simple life, quiet and unremarkable. He liked it that way. He had no idea that everything was about to change. Desperation has a smell even underwater. It hung in the palace corridors like a tangible thing, making servants move faster and speak in whispers. News of the princess's condition had spread throughout the city, despite efforts to keep it quiet. Kelthari citizens gathered in the public squares, creating harmony circles and singing prayers to ancient ocean spirits. It made no difference. Below in the imperial nursery, Lisa continued her weak, terrible crying. Emperor Dran sat in the council chamber while reports came in from across the sector. More specialists were arriving every hour. A Tellurian doctor who claimed expertise in cross-species pediatrics, a group of monks from the serene worlds who practiced therapeutic sound meditation, even a human neurologist from the research station on Proxima Colony. Dran listened to each proposal and approved them all. Pride meant nothing when his daughter was dying. "Your Majesty," said his advisor, an elderly Kelthari named Prenier. "We have received an unusual offer. A trader claims to have ancient artifacts from the First Ocean, devices that might contain the original bonding frequencies from before our recorded history." "Bring everything," Dran said. His voice was hollow. "I do not care if it sounds impossible. Bring it all." In the nursery, Velen held Lisa against her chest. The infant's eyes were barely open now. Her cries had become soft whimpers. Dr. Benth had stopped consulting his instruments. He knew what was coming. They all did. The physician had delivered hundreds of Kelthari infants in his career, and he had never lost one to bonding failure. The shame of it burned in his chest, but his shame was nothing compared to the parents' grief. "The Tellurian doctor is here," a nurse announced quietly. The doctor entered with confidence that immediately irritated everyone present. He was a bulbous creature who moved on 4 legs, his skin mottled green and yellow. He examined Lisa with devices that beeped and hummed, then straightened with obvious satisfaction. "The problem is simple," he announced. "Kelthari bonding is too rigid. Your evolution made you dependent on specific frequencies. My species has no such limitation. I can teach the infant to accept broader sound patterns." He proceeded to make a series of clicks and buzzes. Lisa's whimpering stopped for a moment. Hope flickered in Velen's eyes. Then the infant began screaming, a sound of pure distress that made everyone in the room wince. The doctor was escorted out quickly, still insisting his method would work with more time. They did not have more time. The monks arrived next. There were 7 of them, moving in perfect synchronization. They arranged themselves in a circle around Lisa's basin and began their meditation chant. The sound was beautiful, peaceful, designed to calm the most troubled mind. Lisa seemed to relax slightly. The whimpering grew quieter. "It is working," Velen breathed. Dr. Benth watched his instruments. The neural activity showed no change. Lisa was not bonding. She was simply exhausted. When the monks finished their hour-long meditation, the infant's crying resumed exactly as before. The head monk bowed apologetically. "We have brought peace to thousands of beings," he said softly. "But your daughter needs something we cannot provide. Forgive us." The human neurologist was a woman named Dr. Rains who spoke in rapid technical terms that the translation devices struggled to keep up with. She proposed using electrical stimulation to artificially create the neural pathways that bonding would naturally produce. Dran nearly refused outright, but Velen stopped him with a touch. If it might save her, Velen said. We must try. The procedure took 2 hours. Dr. Rains worked with careful precision, using devices that sent tiny pulses through Lissa's developing brain. When it was finished, the doctor stepped back with professional satisfaction. The pathways are forming, she said. Give it time, they gave it an hour. Lisa's crying did not change. Dr. Benth checked his instruments and shook his head. The artificial pathways were already degrading. Whatever bonding was, it could not be forced through technology. Dr. Rains left quietly, her confidence shaken. Above in the embassy wing, David Walsh finished his shift and headed to his quarters. He passed several diplomats in the hallway who looked haggard and worried. David nodded politely but did not ask questions. It was not his business. He had learned long ago that the best way to work around important people was to be invisible and quiet. His quarters were small but comfortable. Single room with a bed, a desk, a small kitchen unit. David made himself a simple meal and ate while watching a recorded sports game from Earth. His daughter had sent him the file. She knew he liked football. David smiled at her thoughtfulness. He sent her a quick message thanking her, then prepared for bed. Before sleeping, David pulled out an old photograph. It showed his grandmother standing on a rocky beach in Maine, her hair wild in the wind, laughing at something behind the camera. David had been 7 when that photo was taken. She had died when he was 12, but he still remembered her voice. She used to sing to him every night. Old songs, some in English, some in Irish Gaelic she had learned from her own grandmother. David could not remember all the words anymore, but the melodies stayed with him. He hummed one of those melodies now, lying in the dark of his quarters. It was a comfort, a connection to someone long gone. David felt sleep pulling at him. Tomorrow would be another shift. More floors to clean, more hallways to empty of dust and debris. It was good work, honest work. He was content. Far below in the nursery, Lissa's crying was barely audible now. Dr. Benth checked the time. They had perhaps 12 hours left before the damage became permanent. After that, the princess might survive, but she would never be fully healthy. Her mind would be affected, her emotions limited. She would live a half-life. Emperor Dran stood at the window, looking out at the dark water beyond. His reflection stared back at him, the face of a father who had failed. Velen came to stand beside him. Neither spoke. There was nothing left to say. They had tried everything. Science, tradition, spirituality, technology. All of it had failed. Their daughter was slipping away and they were helpless to stop it. In another hour, the night shift would change. A junior administrator named Court, exhausted from days of crisis, would forget to properly seal a service corridor. It was a small mistake, meaningless in itself, but small mistakes sometimes change everything. Court had been working for the Imperial Palace for 15 years, without a single mistake on his record. He was proud of that fact. He took his duties seriously, always double-checking locks and security protocols before ending his shift. But Court had not slept properly in 4 days. The palace was in crisis, and every administrator was working double shifts. His eyes burned with fatigue. His movements were clumsy from exhaustion. He walked through the service corridor that connected the embassy wing to the palace residential section. It was his job to ensure this passage stayed sealed. The diplomats had their own areas, and the imperial family deserved privacy. Court checked the lock mechanism, saw that it showed secure, and moved on. What he did not notice was that the door had not fully engaged. The heavy panel stood open by less than 2 centimeters. In his exhausted state, Court missed it completely. David Walsh started his shift at the usual time. He clocked in at the maintenance office, collected his cart and supplies, and headed to the embassy wing. The diplomatic section was always quiet during night cycles. Most of the staff kept to daytime schedules that matched their homeworlds. David preferred it this way. He could work at his own pace without worrying about disturbing anyone. He started on the upper floor and worked his way down, dusting, sweeping, mopping. The repetitive nature of the work was soothing. David had done many jobs in his 47 years, but this one suited him best. No stress, no complicated politics, just simple tasks done well. He fitted his earbuds in and selected his music. Tonight he chose his grandmother's playlist again. The songs made him think of simpler times. David hummed along while he worked. The Wellerman was playing, an old whaling song from Earth's Age of Sail. His grandmother had loved this one. She used to sing it while cooking dinner, her voice carrying through their small house. David's humming was unconscious, a habit so ingrained he barely noticed he was doing it. The sound resonated from his chest, deep and steady. In the nursery 3 floors below and 2 wings over, Empress Velen rocked her daughter gently. Lisa's cries had faded to weak whimpers. The infant's scales had lost even more color. Dr. Benth stood nearby, his instruments powered down. There was nothing more to measure. They were simply waiting now, bearing witness to the end. Then something impossible happened. Lisa stopped crying. The silence was so sudden, so complete, that for several heartbeats nobody moved. Velen's eyes went wide. Dran, who had been standing in the corner like a statue, took a sharp breath. Dr. Benth's head snapped up. "What?" the doctor started to say. Lisa made a small sound, not a cry but a coo. Her tiny fins fluttered with more energy than they had shown in days. Her eyes opened fully and seemed to focus on something no one else could see. Then she began crying again, but differently. This was not the terrible wail of distress. This was the sound of a child reaching for something just out of grasp. She sensed something, Velen whispered. Something calmed her. What was it? Dr. Benth rushed to his instruments, powering them back up. "I need to analyze the audio from the last 60 seconds. There must have been a sound, something that reached her." His fingers worked quickly across the controls. The room's sensors could detect vibrations through water that no Kelthari ear could consciously hear. The system filtered out Lisa's own cries and amplified everything else. There, faint, distant, but unmistakable, a low harmonic hum. It was coming through the ventilation system that circulated fresh water throughout the palace. The frequency was irregular, organic, rising and falling in patterns that seemed almost random but somehow felt right. Dr. Benth stared at the analysis in disbelief. "This is not Kelthari," he said slowly. "The patterns are wrong, too variable. But look at this," he pointed to a secondary screen. "The base frequency matches our ancient bonding harmonics almost perfectly. Whoever or whatever is making this sound is creating the foundation we need, but with variations that are completely unprecedented." "Can you trace it?" Dran demanded. "The system is trying. The sound is traveling through water channels, being distorted and reflected." "Give me a moment." Emperor Dran did not have patience for moments. He grabbed a communicator. "Security, seal the palace. No one enters or leaves until we identify a sound source. Check every occupied room. I want to know who is making noise right now." Velen was not listening to the orders. She was watching her daughter. Lisa had stopped crying entirely now. The infant was alert, her eyes bright, her fins moving with purpose. She was searching, listening, waiting for the sound to return. "Please," Velen said softly. "Whoever you are, wherever you are, please do not stop." David finished mopping the hallway on the 3rd floor. He pushed his cart toward the elevator, still humming. The song had changed now. His playlist had moved to an old lullaby, one his mother used to sing to him that she had learned from his grandmother. Sogan, it was called. A Welsh lullaby. David did not speak Welsh, but he knew the melody by heart. His voice carried through the empty corridor. The sound waves traveled through the air, hit the walls, found their way into the ventilation system through tiny gaps around the air circulation panels. Those vibrations moved through the network of ducts and channels, distorted by distance and material but not destroyed. They traveled down 3 floors, across 2 wings, and emerged in the nursery through the water circulation vents. In the nursery, Dr. Benth shouted in triumph, "I have it. The source is in the embassy wing, 3rd floor corridor near section 7. Security is converging now." Dran was already moving, swimming toward the door with speed that made the water churn. Velen stayed with Lisa, but her entire being was focused on one thing. They had found the source. Someone, somewhere in the palace, was making the sound that could save her daughter. David reached the elevator and pressed the button. He was thinking about tomorrow's schedule. The conference rooms on the 2nd floor would need extra attention. Some diplomatic function was planned, and they always made a mess. He hummed quietly, waiting for the elevator to arrive, completely unaware that 6 armed security guards were swimming through palace corridors with his exact location. The elevator door opened. David pushed his cart inside and reached for the button. Then he heard voices behind him, urgent voices. He turned and saw the security team emerging from a side passage, moving fast. David's first instinct was to get out of their way. He pulled his cart back out of the elevator. "Excuse me, sirs," he said politely. "Did you need—" 6 weapons pointed at him. David's words died in his throat. His hands went up automatically, heart suddenly pounding. What had he done? What law had he broken? His mind raced through the last hour of work, trying to identify the mistake. "Sir," the head guard said firmly, "you need to come with us immediately, by order of Emperor Dran himself." David Walsh had never been arrested before. He had lived a quiet, law-abiding life. He paid his taxes on time, never started fights, and kept to himself. Now he was being escorted through a palace by armed guards while his mind spun in panicked circles. His hands were shaking. His mouth was dry. The guards would not answer his questions. They simply moved him forward through corridors he had never seen before, deeper into sections of the palace that janitors were never allowed to enter. They passed through a security checkpoint, where David's identification was scanned 3 times, then through another sealed door. The architecture changed here. The walls were smoother, inlaid with precious materials that glowed softly. David realized he was being taken to the Imperial residential section. This was worse than he thought. Had he somehow offended the Emperor? Broken some cultural rule he did not know existed? "Please," David said, his voice barely steady. "Can you tell me what I did wrong?" "I will apologize." "I will fix it." The head guard glanced at him. Something in the guard's expression was not quite anger. "You did nothing wrong, human. Just come quickly." They arrived at a large door guarded by 4 more security officers. The door opened, and David was ushered into a room that took his breath away. It was enormous, with walls that curved upward into a domed ceiling covered in bioluminescent patterns. At the center was a basin filled with gently moving water, and standing beside that basin were 2 Kelthari who could only be royalty. Emperor Dran was nearly 3 meters tall, his scales a deep blue-green, his fins marked with gold patterns that signified his rank. Empress Velen was slightly smaller, her coloring lighter, but her presence was just as commanding. Both were staring at David with an intensity that made him want to disappear. "Your Majesties," David said, dropping to one knee because it seemed like the right thing to do. "I swear I did not mean to cause offense. Whatever I did, I am deeply sorry." "Stand up," Dran said. His voice was deep as ocean trenches. "We have little time for ceremony." David stood on shaking legs. Velen stepped forward. Her eyes were ancient and knowing, but right now they held something David recognized. Desperation. "The sound you were making," she said, "in the corridor." "Were you singing?" I was humming, Your Majesty. Just old songs. I did not realize anyone could hear. The embassy wing is usually empty during my shift." "Make the sound again," Dran commanded. David blinked. This was not what he had expected. "You want me to hum?" "Our daughter is dying," Velen said quietly. The words hit David like a physical blow. "She needs bonding frequencies to survive. We have tried everything. Every expert in the sector has failed. But when you made your sounds, she calmed." She responded. "We do not understand why, but we do not need to understand. We need you to make those sounds again, please." Understanding crashed over David like a wave. The tension in the palace, the specialists coming and going, all of it made sense now. "Take me to her," he said without hesitation. They brought him to the basin. David looked down and saw the tiny Kelthari infant floating in the water. She was so small, so fragile. Her scales were pale, almost translucent. Her fins barely moved, but her eyes were open, and when she saw him, she made a small sound. Not quite a cry, more like a question. David's heart broke and mended in the same moment. He thought of his own daughter 23 years ago when she was a newborn. He remembered those first terrifying weeks when she would not stop crying, when he and his wife took turns walking her through the night, singing every song they knew until finally finding the ones that worked. He remembered the exhaustion, the fear, the overwhelming love. "Hey there, little one," David said softly. He pulled the earbuds from his ears and set his music player aside. Then, without overthinking it, he began to hum. Not the sea shanty this time. Not the lullaby. Something deeper, older. A melody his grandmother used to hum while working in her garden. David never knew if it had words or a name. It was just a sound she made, peaceful and constant as breathing. The room held perfectly still. Even the water in the basin seemed to quiet. David let the sound come from his chest, feeling it resonate through his body. He swayed slightly, a unconscious movement the way he used to sway when holding his daughter. The melody rose and fell, never quite repeating exactly, each phrase a variation on the theme. Lissa's eyes fixed on him, her tiny body oriented toward the sound. Then, impossibly wonderfully, she began to make sounds back. Not crying, not distress. These were coos, gurgles, the experimental sounds of an infant discovering her voice. And within those sounds, David could hear something amazing. She was matching his frequency, finding harmonics within his melody. Dr. Benth stood frozen at his instruments, watching readings he had never seen before. The neural pathways, he whispered. They are forming. She is bonding. How is this possible? David did not hear the question. He was completely focused on the infant. He varied his humming, trying different melodies, watching how she responded. When he hummed higher, her sounds went higher. When he went lower, she followed. It was like a conversation, a dance of sound between species. Velen's hand covered her mouth. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with the water around her. Dran stood perfectly rigid, afraid that any movement might break the spell. Minutes passed. David's throat grew tired, but he kept humming. He reached down and let his fingers touch the water's surface. Lisa's tiny hand reached up and brushed against his fingers through the water. Hello? David whispered between hums. That is right. You are going to be okay. I promise. Dr. Benth finally found his voice. The bonding is stabilizing. Her neural development is accelerating to normal rates. This should not be possible, but it is happening. David hummed for an hour, then another. His throat ached. His voice grew rough. But every time he thought about stopping, Lisa would make a questioning sound and he would find the strength to continue. Finally, the infant's eyes began to close. Not from weakness this time, but from healthy exhaustion. She had eaten. She had bonded. Now she needed sleep. David let his humming fade to silence. Lisa yawned, a tiny gesture that made everyone in the room smile despite themselves. Then she settled into the water and slept peacefully for the first time since her birth. The room exhaled. Velen turned to David, and for a moment neither spoke. Then the Empress did something that shocked every Kelthari present. She bowed, deeply, to a human janitor. You gave us our daughter's life, she said. We can never repay this debt. David shook his head, uncomfortable with the gratitude. I just hummed some songs, Your Majesty. Nothing special. To us, Dran said quietly, you performed a miracle. But even as relief filled the room, Dr. Benth was studying his instruments with growing concern. He said nothing yet, but the readings were clear. Lisa had bonded, but she had bonded specifically with David's voice, David's frequencies, David's unique human harmonics. Without continued exposure, the bonding would weaken. The princess would need David, not for an hour or a day, for years. 3 days passed in a strange new rhythm. David stayed in the palace, given quarters near the nursery. Every few hours, someone would come to fetch him. Lisa needed him. The infant would grow fussy, her cries taking on that edge of distress, and David would come to hum until she settled. He took shifts with Empress Velen, who was learning to incorporate some of David's melodies into her own Kelthari harmonics. It helped, but not enough. Lisa wanted David specifically. The palace staff did not know what to make of him. A human janitor eating meals with the imperial family. A maintenance worker being treated like an honored guest. David felt equally confused. He kept expecting someone to tell him it was time to leave, time to return to his normal life. But the request never came. Dr. Benth spent those 3 days studying every recording of David's humming. He brought in linguistic experts, audio engineers, even evolutionary biologists. What they discovered was remarkable. Human vocal patterns shaped by millions of years of evolution on Earth contained something Benth called adaptive harmonics. Humans did not sing in perfect pitch like the Kelthari. Instead, they created sounds that shifted and adjusted naturally, with imperfections that somehow made the harmonics richer and more complex. Your species evolved in an incredibly varied environment, Benth explained to David one evening. They sat in the doctor's laboratory, surrounded by screens showing sound wave analysis. Wind, caves, forests, open plains. Your ancestors needed to communicate across all these different acoustic spaces, so your vocal cords and hearing developed to be flexible. You create sounds that adapt and breathe. David listened, trying to understand. But the Kelthari have beautiful voices. I have heard the recordings. Your people sing perfectly. Exactly, Benth said. Perfectly. We evolved in the deep ocean trenches where acoustic conditions never changed. Perfect pitch was survival. But perfection can be rigid. Princess Lissa was born prematurely, far from our homeworld. The traditional bonding did not take. Her neural pathways needed something different, something that could adapt. That is what you gave her. I just hummed songs my grandmother taught me, David said quietly. Those songs carried the acoustic memory of your entire species. Benth replied. Earth's atmosphere, Earth's variety, Earth's beautiful imperfection. That is what saved her. On the fourth day, Emperor Dran called a meeting of his advisory council. David was asked to attend. He sat at the enormous table, feeling impossibly out of place among ministers and generals and ancient advisors. Dran stood at the head of the table, his presence commanding silence. We face a difficult situation, the Emperor began. My daughter has bonded. She is healthy and growing stronger. But Dr. Benth's analysis shows that the bonding is specific. She needs continued exposure to human harmonics, specifically David Walsh's voice, for at least 3 years, possibly 5. Without this, the bonding will weaken and she may suffer developmental problems. The room erupted in quiet discussion. David sat frozen. 3 to 5 years. The words echoed in his mind. He thought of his daughter on Earth, his small apartment, his simple life, 5 years in an alien palace away from everything he knew. We have drafted a formal request to the Galactic Council. Dran continued. We are asking for Mr. Walsh to be appointed as Royal Bonding Companion. It is a new position. The Council must approve it, but I am hopeful they will understand the necessity. One of the advisors, an elderly Keltari with silver scales, spoke up. Your Majesty, have we considered the humans' wishes? This is an enormous commitment we are asking of him. All eyes turned to David. He felt his face grow hot. I need time to think, he managed to say. Dran nodded. Of course. Take whatever time you need. David left the meeting and walked through the palace gardens. They were beautiful here, adapted for both water-breathing and air-breathing species. Flowering plants grew in sealed environments while Keltari vegetation swayed in the underwater currents beyond the transparent walls. David found a bench and sat heavily. His communicator buzzed. A message from his daughter. Dad, they are saying on the news that you saved an alien princess. Is it true? Are you okay? Call me when you can. David stared at the message for a long time. Then he made the call. His daughter's face appeared on the screen, her expression a mixture of concern and excitement. Dad, what is going on? The news said you are some kind of hero now. I hummed some songs to a baby, David said. That is all. That is not what they are saying. They are saying you did something no one else could do. They are saying you saved the Keltari princess. David rubbed his face. They want me to stay. 3 to 5 years. The baby needs me. She bonded with my voice somehow. His daughter was quiet for a moment. What do you want to do? I do not know. This was not in my plans. I was supposed to work another 7 years and retire. Maybe move back to Maine. Buy that little house by the water we talked about. Dad, his daughter said gently, when I was a baby, how many nights did you walk me around the house singing? Hundreds, David admitted. You would not sleep unless I sang that one specific song. Do you regret those nights? Of course not. You were my daughter. I would have done anything. Then you already know your answer. David closed his eyes. His daughter was right. He thought about Lysa's tiny face, those huge dark eyes looking up at him with trust. He thought about Empress Velen's gratitude, Emperor Dran's quiet desperation. He thought about an infant who needed him, not because he was special or talented or important, but simply because his grandmother had taught him old songs. That evening, David requested a private meeting with the Emperor and Empress. They met in a small sitting room, just the 3 of them. David stood before them, his decision made. I will stay, he said simply, for as long as she needs me. Velen's relief was visible. Thank you. Thank you so much. But I have conditions, David continued. I am not a noble or a diplomat. I'm a janitor, a regular person. I cannot pretend to be something I am not. What do you need? Dran asked. Let me keep working. Part-time, maybe. I need to feel useful. I need to remember who I am. Done, Dran said immediately. And I want to call my daughter every week. No matter what. Of course. And when this is over, when Lissa does not need me anymore, I go back to my life. No ceremony, no fuss. I just go home. Velen smiled. It was the first time David had seen her smile. When this is over, David Walsh, you will be family. Family never truly leaves. The Galactic Council approved the request within 2 days. David Walsh was officially appointed royal bonding companion to Princess Lissa of the Kelthari Empire. The news spread across the sector. A human janitor who saved a princess by humming old songs. Some species found it charming. Others found it baffling. The Kelthari found it miraculous. David moved his few possessions into the palace quarters. He set up his small room with pictures of his daughter, his grandmother, his life on Earth. He needed these reminders. This palace, these people, this situation was temporary. Beautiful and important, yes, but temporary. He was not a hero or a miracle worker. He was just a man who knew some old songs. In the nursery, Lissa slept peacefully. Her scales had brightened to a healthy blue. Her fins were strong. When she woke, she would look for David and he would be there. He would hum her grandmother's lullabies and she would grow strong and healthy. It was not the life David had planned, but as he sat beside the basin that night, humming softly while Lissa slept, he realized something. Purpose does not always announce itself with trumpets and grand gestures. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in the form of a crying infant who needs the songs only you can sing. 5 years can change everything. David Walsh learned this truth slowly, day by day as the seasons passed on Thalassia Prime. The first year was the hardest. He woke each morning in a palace that still felt foreign, surrounded by people who treated him with a respect he did not think he deserved. He hummed to Lissa 3 times a day, watched her grow from a helpless infant into a curious toddler, and tried to maintain the simple routine that kept him grounded. He kept his promise to work. The palace staff protested at first. It seemed wrong for the royal bonding companion to clean floors. But David insisted and eventually they accepted it. He worked mornings in the embassy wing just a few hours, enough to feel like himself. The other maintenance workers treated him normally, which he appreciated more than they knew. They joked with him, complained about supply shortages, asked his advice on stubborn stains. It was ordinary and comfortable. Lissa thrived. By her second year, she was swimming confidently through the palace corridors, chattering in both Kelthari and English. She had learned human words from David, picking them up with the easy fluency of childhood. She called him Uncle Dave, a title that made his chest tight with affection every time he heard it. When she was happy, she would hum the songs he had taught her. When she was sad or scared, she would find him and ask for the grandmother song, which was what she called the Old Welsh Lullaby. Dr. Benth published 3 scientific papers on cross-species bonding. Other researchers came to study the phenomenon. David submitted to tests and interviews with patient resignation. They recorded his voice, analyzed his breathing patterns, mapped the unique ways his vocal cords produced sound. The scientists were excited by their discoveries. David just wanted to spend time with Lissa. By the 3rd year, something unexpected happened. Other Kelthari parents began requesting David's help. There were 3 more cases of premature births, infants struggling with bonding. David worked with each family, teaching them the techniques that worked with Lissa. He learned that other humans could help too, though each infant responded slightly differently. The Kelthari began incorporating human harmonics into their traditional bonding ceremonies. It was controversial at first. Some of the older generation saw it as abandoning tradition, but when they saw the results, when they watched struggling infants calm and thrive, most objections faded. David trained others. Kelthari nurses learned to hum human lullabies. Human volunteers were brought in to assist with difficult cases. What started as a desperate solution for one infant became a new branch of pediatric medicine. Dr. Benth called it adaptive harmonic therapy. David called it singing to babies. Both descriptions were accurate. His daughter visited twice. She was engaged now, planning a wedding on Earth. David felt the pull of home during those visits. He missed the ocean air of Maine, the small pleasures of his old life. But he also loved Lissa with a fierce protectiveness that surprised him. She was not his daughter, not really, but she felt like family in a way that transcended species and biology. By the 5th year, Lissa was a bright, energetic child who moved between the Kelthari and human worlds with natural ease. She attended lessons with Kelthari tutors but also learned about Earth from David. He told her about mountains and forests, about snow and seasons. about the grandmother who taught him the songs that saved her life. Lissa listened with wide eyes, asking endless questions. "When you leave, Uncle Dave," she asked one day, "will you forget about me?" They were in the garden, Lissa practicing her swimming in a small pool while David sat nearby. The question hit him harder than he expected. "Never," he said firmly. "You are stuck with me, little one. Even when I am back on Earth, we will talk every week. I promise. But you are leaving soon." Dr. Benth said the bonding is complete. You do not have to stay anymore. David looked at this child who had changed his life so completely. She was healthy now, fully bonded. Her neural pathways developed and strong. She did not need him to survive anymore. But need came in different forms. "Do you want me to leave?" he asked gently. Lissa shook her head quickly. "No, but I do not want you to stay because you have to. I want you to stay because you want to." "Then I will stay a bit longer," David said, "until you are ready." That conversation was overheard by Empress Velen, who stood just out of sight. She reported it to Dran that evening, her voice thick with emotion. "He was supposed to stay until she no longer needed him," Velen said. "But now he stays because she wants him. That is love." The official ceremony marking the completion of David's contract was held on a clear day when the sun made the ocean surface sparkle like diamonds. The Galactic Council sent representatives. Scientists who had studied the case attended. Keltari citizens filled the public squares to watch the broadcast. David stood in formal robes he still was not comfortable wearing, while Emperor Dran addressed the assembly. 5 years ago, a human janitor saved my daughter's life by humming old songs. Today we recognize that what he did went far beyond saving one child. David Walsh showed us that the greatest gifts we can give each other are often the simplest. Presence, patience, the willingness to share what we know, even when it seems ordinary to us. Dran turned to David. "The Kelthari people honor you. We name you Friend of the Empire, a title given to only 17 individuals in our 10,000-year history. You will always have a home here." David accepted the honor with quiet grace, but when it was his turn to speak, he kept his words simple. "I did not do anything special," he said. "I just sang to a baby who needed songs. Any of you would have done the same." Later, at the private reception, Lisa tugged on David's formal robe. She had prepared a performance. With her mother's help, she had learned one of David's songs perfectly. She stood before the assembled guests and sang Suogun, the Welsh lullaby, in a clear voice that blended Kelthari harmonics with human melody. It was something new, something that had never existed before, a bridge between species built from music and love. David cried without shame. His grandmother would have loved this moment. When the ceremony ended and the guests departed, David walked through the palace gardens one more time. Tomorrow he would begin packing. His daughter's wedding was in 3 months. It was time to go home. But home had become a complicated concept. Part of his heart would stay here, with a little girl who called him Uncle Dave and sang his grandmother's songs. Lissa found him by the reflecting pool. She carried something wrapped in cloth. "I made you a gift," she said shyly, "so you remember." Inside the cloth was a small sculpture carved from the same luminescent coral that formed the palace walls. It showed 2 figures, one human, one Kelthari, their forms abstract but clearly recognizable. The human figure was humming, captured in a moment of sound made visible. The Kelthari child reached toward that sound with tiny hands. "I will treasure this," David said, his voice rough. "Always. Will you still call me every week?" Lisa asked. "Every single week. I promise." They sat together as the sun set, turning the ocean golden orange. David hummed quietly, and Lissa hummed with him, their voices creating harmonics that would have been impossible for either species alone. It was beautiful. It was simple. It was everything. 3 months later, David stood on a beach in Maine watching waves crash against rocky shores. He had bought the small house by the water, just as planned. His daughter lived nearby with her new husband. Life had returned to something like normal. But every week he sat down with his communicator and called Thalassia Prime. Lisa would appear on the screen, chattering about her lessons and her friends, asking about Earth and demanding new songs. And David would sing to her, his voice carrying across the stars, connecting worlds with the simplest of gifts. The songs his grandmother taught him, the melodies that saved a life, the harmonics of human imperfection that somehow created something perfect. He was just a man who knew some old songs. But those songs had changed everything.